Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Big Sky Now podcast. I'm your host, Josh Amick, and my panel this week is the same as it is on Tuesday with Fritz and Ian here to break down this weekend's matchups of the college football playoffs in the second round. So let's get right into it. This should be a good matchup. It's a rematch of last year's FCS championship with Montana heading to South Dakota State. South Dakota State returned a lot of key players. Montana looks a little bit different than they did last year. Fritz, in your expertise, can Montana use their new players and kind of people that were not here last year to their advantage, or do you think that puts them at a disadvantage playing in unfamiliar territory with the unfamiliar team?
They played them in January, and I thought their defense held up pretty well against one of the more talented FCS teams I'd seen. I've been watching a lot of FCS football through the years. SDSU graduated a kid named Isaiah Davis, who's drafted and playing from the New York Jets at running back. But, Mark Gronowski's back, and then they have this not related Johnsons, Amar and Angel, and they've combined for 23 rushing touchdowns. When you look back to January, a couple of the weapons that the Grizz had that are back are the receiving crew, and which had a few drops in that game, and Junior Bergen, which the Jackrabbits, unlike last week's opponent, Tennessee State, were able to keep the ball away from in the kicking game. The few times that they did kick off and punt, Bergen just couldn't really get an opportunity to have a game-breaking return. Yet, and people like Alex Gubner are gone, and two really good linebackers from last year are gone. Montana's an underdog. They'll be trying to spring a major upset against a very talented team that has, I think, an NFL-ready quarterback in Gronowski, great receivers, and SDSU is still loaded. They're not the top seed anymore, but they're right there. They're going to be a factor, and Montana's really going to have to play the kind of game we haven't seen from them all year to have a chance against them.
I like that. I like that wording.
Fritz mentioned on the last episode a little bit of the differences in the Montana, especially that defensive line from last year, or the trenches from last year, but more so on the defensive line. Last year, Montana gave up around 118 yards per game on the ground, which was 15th in the country. This year, it's up to about 140 yards per game, which is 42nd in the country. It's a bit of a difference from last year, and now especially going against a run-heavy team that might come up on Saturday. Last year in that title game, obviously held them to 188 yards on the ground. I say held to, it's a lot of yards on the ground, but for a team like that, that's not a bad day for them. I think this is going to be a run-heavy day. I think for Montana to be able to compete, it's going to come down to guys like Bergen, maybe getting him the ball in space on some offensive plays. Maybe he can break one. Maybe SDSU kicks one to him and he returns it. But I think it's going to be a good day for the Jackrabbits. I just think they're a little bit overpowering for Montana this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned Bergen, and again Saturday they threw to him maybe twice. He had one reception, and man, they have some game breakers at the receiver spot. Minus Font who's hurt, and they're just not getting the ball out there on the edges or up the seam like you'd think they would with that kind of talent out there. And then they're matching up against, like I mentioned, a really good team, South Dakota State.
Well, Fritz, kind of to touch on that, the game against Tennessee State, they were able to run the ball pretty easily. Do you think that's the reason why they're not getting Bergen the ball? I know the game I was at, Portland State, I think he only had 2 passes too, but as dynamic as a player as he is, I feel like against a team like South Dakota State, you're going to need to get him the ball in any shape or form. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And just looking at the Montana State game, he's probably your most gifted player, and I think they threw one slant to him in that game, and every pass went to the boundaries, instead of up the field. And I suppose Montana State had a lot to do with that. They have a really good defense to fight despite some injuries. They're still loaded there. That's why they're top seeded. We'll talk about that some more coming up, I'm sure. But yeah, it's just kind of from a layman's standpoint, which I am, it's just kind of puzzling to me that Bergen and Keelan White and Racanelli, they've made big plays, but they don't seem to be, a constant threat to do it in the pass game.
Yeah, that's a good point. That could be the difference in the game. If they get down big to South Dakota State, they're gonna have to get the ball to their playmakers. They're not going to be able to use the game script of just running heavy if they fall down early. But hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully they get their revenge on last year. But moving on to what Fritz was just talking about is the opponent of Montana State, which is going to be UT Martin. They put up 41 points against New Hampshire, but they also held New Hampshire to just 10 points. What kind of problems do we think this team is going to bring on with the Bobcats, or do you think they won't have much issues with UT Martin, Ian?
Just kind of looking at their season as a whole, they lean a little bit more on the ground game with 170 rushing yards, but last week against New Hampshire is pretty balanced, 246 through the air and 236 on the ground. Obviously, it worked for them last week. They're probably going to try and run it out on the field again this weekend. I also look at their defense. They forced 24 turnovers this year, and they have 4 defensive touchdowns, which is the 5th most in the FCS. So, I mean, they're a pretty opportunistic defense. They're going to take advantage of any miscues you have. Obviously, Montana State's not known for its mistakes, but if they do make any, I could see UT Martin pouncing on them and taking advantage of those opportunities. And save the best point for last, they play really good run defense. 5th in the country, about 85 yards allowed per game. That's going to be an exciting matchup to watch this weekend.
Yeah, something has to give there. They give up 86 rushing yards a game on average, and Montana State is in the top 3 for rushing offense. So something's got to give. I think it's notable in 2021, in this same round, Tennessee Martin had to come to Bobcat Stadium and play, and it was Tommy Malotte's first start as quarterback. That was after the Cat Grizz game. The Bobcats still got a bye even though they lost, and they at some point during that 2-week break they named Malotte the starter, and their starting quarterback, I believe his name was McKay, he hit the transfer portal within a couple of days of the Cat Grizz game. So Malotte starts, and all he did that game against Tennessee Martin was run for 180 in his first start, 180 yards. He also threw for 51 on 20 passes. So as Coach Vigan said today, they were pretty limited. It's his first start, what's going to happen, but they ran their +1 run game pretty well. Speaking of which, I think Tennessee Martin's pretty good at that too. Their quarterback's guy named Kincaid Dent, and I think he does that +1 run game pretty well. The difference, like Malotte, but the difference is not as many yards, and he's also 6'4". He's pretty slippery, keeps plays going. All that said, I think we still have to mention that Montana State is the top seed, and they are 12-0, and they beat Tennessee Martin 26-7 3 years ago. And Tennessee Martin has got to be an underdog. I know they beat Tennessee State by touchdown, and Tennessee State just came in here to Missoula and lost by 2 touchdowns. And I don't see a lot changing as far as who's a favorite and who's not the favorite. It's going to be the Cats.
Yeah, I like that you brought up the turnover factor, because I feel like talking about Montana State all year that we have mentioned that before, that this team is so good and so balanced that you need an unorthodox play to happen to almost beat this team. And it seems like UT Martin has been doing that all year, but they're playing a team that hasn't been making mistakes all year. So like you guys said, one of those things has to give. This matchup actually might be better than maybe the bettors are putting on. I don't see the line yet, but it might be a good game. Something has to give with that run defense and that run offense. So moving on to the other team that had a bye was UC Davis. They host Illinois State this week. After their road victory, Illinois State has now won 6 straight games. What are we expecting from the UC Davis team in the playoffs after not being in the playoffs last year, Fritz?
Well, I expect them to play good defense and let their dudes on offense go to town. Miles Hastings at quarterback and Lan Larson at running back. This game last week that Illinois State won, they had to go on the road because they lost their stadium to some high school playoff games, and they went down and allowed 602 yards and still won, mainly because SEMO committed 8 turnovers, and their quarterback, De Laurent, threw 85 passes, and 2 of them went to the other team for touchdowns. 4 of them went to the other team total. 2 of them were returned for pick sixes. So it was kind of a weird game where the Redbirds were outgained 602 to 322, and they still were comfortably ahead until CMO put up a couple touchdowns late and scored one with minute 31 left, cut it to 8, and obviously didn't get the onside kick or get it done after that.
I don't think UC Davis is going to throw 85 times this week. I'll just throw that out there for y'all.
That's a fair bet.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it's going to be a well-rested UC Davis team. We saw them just kind of down the stretch of the regular season, had that close game against Sacramento State after a really tough slate to end of the regular season. I think it was Montana, and then broken up by a game against maybe Portland State, and then it was Montana State. Anyway, I think they needed that bye week to really get back on track, get some of their high usage guys rested, as I think John put a couple of weeks ago. I think this bye is going to be important for them, but you do have to worry a little bit about a team coming in hot. We just mentioned 6-game winning streak for them coming in, for Illinois State coming in. Maybe they're riding a little bit high. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how UC Davis looks after the bye. I think it probably does them more favors than it does hurt them. But the last game we have on the slate is Lehigh coming to Idaho to face the Vandals at home. We all expected it last week to be Richmond playing Idaho, but they get, I guess you could call it a break, playing Lehigh. Do you think this matchup helps the Vandals not having to face Richmond, Ian, or what do you think, or what are you expecting in this matchup?
I just mentioned it in the last game. Team coming in hot, you got to be wary of an upset, right? This is another pretty opportunistic defense. They have 14 interceptions this year. I mean, they're ball hawks. I forget exactly where it ranks nationally, but I know it was pretty high. We've seen Idaho thrown some interceptions this year. You gotta watch out for that against this Lehigh team that's coming in hot after an upset. Can't overlook them. Gotta be careful with the football and take care of it to be able to get this win on Saturday.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. The former Engineers, now called the Mountain Hawks, I guess nobody gave them a chance. And Richmond, maybe the CAA, as we call the Colonial Athletic Association, isn't quite the power it used to be. You know, half the teams that used to run that league are up in the FBS now. And I thought Lehigh had a chance, but there wasn't very many of us did. They've also won 6 straight. I think it's kind of notable that their last loss came against Yale, one of the Ivy League teams, and it was two big plays late that lifted them. You know, they were down, and their defense held up, and you know they're down, I believe, 16-6, and they scored 2 long touchdowns, one running, one passing, and like you mentioned, they have a pretty good defense, especially in the pass game. I noticed the Spiders QB averaged barely 5 yards per attempt, so you know Idaho's going to have to deal with a pretty good pass defense, and hopefully be able to run the ball well and play action off it and take care of business. This is the same round that the Vandals lost last year to a team we didn't get much of a chance to, the Albany Great Danes. So I think that sticks with the Vandals, and I think they'll pull it through. But Lehigh's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if anyone on the panel is going to give Lehigh a chance, or if the Vandals get through the first round, unlike they did last year. So that brings us into my favorite segment of the show, which is when we give you our expertise picks. Fritz, we're going to start off with you. Just 1-1 last week we all were on NAU except for John. But what do you got this weekend?
I know that was dumb on my part because
it was all of us.
So, not just you, Fritz.
John Christian played
Texas. It wasn't just you.
Yeah. Well, Abilene Christian played Texas Tech tough and played Idaho very tough. So I should have known better. My picks, I'll go South Dakota State over Montana, Montana State over Tennessee Martin. I'm picking all home teams. UC Davis over Illinois State and their coach, Brock Spack. I don't have a joke here. I just want to say Brock Spack. And then I have Idaho beating Lehigh.
All right.
Man, Fritz and I just keep having the same picks, but I'm gonna switch it up. I'm gonna pick the upset with Lehigh over Idaho, just so we have a little head-to-head there.
Okay.
All right.
Maybe their pass defense comes up big, gets a couple of interceptions. I know going against a good pass defense, you're going to try and run. I know Idaho was missing a couple of their running backs a couple weeks ago. I don't know who's going to play on Saturday, so maybe that's a key matchup in this game.
Yeah, John is not here, but he did give me his picks. He's on the same page as Fritz. He's got all the home teams. So we have South Dakota State over Montana, Montana State over UT Martin, UC Davis over Illinois State, and Lehigh over Idaho.
Wait, Idaho over Lehigh, right?
Idaho over Lehigh, excuse me.
Okay.
My apologies. Yeah, I don't know. I think there is an upset in here. I'm just not sure what it is. So I'm just going to stick with the home teams. I've been real bad at trying to find the upsets all season. It hasn't worked out. So I'm going to go with all favorites this week. And I'm also going to pick all the home teams, South Dakota State, Montana State, UC Davis, and Idaho. Well, that is going to wrap things up for this episode of the Big Sky Now podcast. We will be back next week breaking down all of the matchups and then heading into round 3 already. Can't believe how fast this season has gone by. But I want to thank you, Ian and Fritz, for always being here. We hope John and Mark feel better. And we'll see you all next week on another episode of the Big Sky Now podcast. Take care.
Go Western Bulldogs. See you guys.